Montana Territory, June 12, 1874. The sun burned high and bright over the town of Red Elk Ridge, but inside the whitewashed clapboard church, the air had turned cold. Beatrice Stenner stood at the altar, hands trembling, the lace sleeves of her wedding dress clinging to her arms. Her groom, Thomas Greening, had just turned his back on her. No words, no explanation. One last look, and he walked out through the chapel doors, leaving stunned silence behind him and the ring sitting on the pinewood floor like a forgotten coin. Her mother cried quietly. Her father looked like he wanted to burn the whole town down. But Beatrice, she just stood there, staring at the ring her whole life had been wrapped around. Her fiancé's boots had not even left the front steps when the whispers began, thick as smoke. She must have done something. Maybe he found out about her brother's debts. Maybe she ain't pure. Beatrice's knees gave out and she sat hard on the pew, her jaw clenched to keep her chin from shaking. She would not cry, not here, not in front of these people. Then the church door creaked again. A tall man stepped inside, sun-creased and dust-covered, the kind of man who made folks pause when he walked into a room. He wore a brown trail coat, dark jeans crusted with trail dust, and a wide-brimmed hat he held respectfully in his hands. Blue eyes scanned the room, but when they landed on her, they stopped and stayed. "Beatrice," he said, his voice steady and low, her spine straightened. Her heart shuddered. "Jeremiah Cade," she whispered, barely believing it. He walked forward, slow and sure, boots echoing on the wooden floor. "I heard what happened." He looked to the ring on the floor, then back at her. "You deserve better than that man walking away like a coward." He bent down, picked up the ring, and held it out to her. She stared at it. "What are you doing?" "What he should have done," Jeremiah said. "Only I mean it." The crowd gasped. Her father stepped forward but paused when Jeremiah turned his eyes on him, calm, respectful but unshakable. Beatrice's heart pounded in her chest. "You do not even know what you are saying." "I have known you since you were 12, he said. "I have known what kind of woman you are longer than he ever tried to." Her fingers trembled as he reached for her hand. "If you do not want this, say so, but if you do, let me put this ring where it belongs." She hesitated. Then slowly she nodded. His fingers were rough, but his touch was gentle as he slipped the ring onto her hand. A breath caught in her throat. The pews behind her had gone silent. She met his eyes and something inside her steadied. Later, after the crowd had scattered and the church had emptied, Beatrice sat with Jeremiah on the chapel steps. Her veil was gone, her hair coming loose from its pins, the lace of her dress catching the warm breeze. "I never expected to see you again," she said. "I never stopped thinking about you," Jeremiah admitted, eyes on the horizon. "But you were set to marry, I figured. I missed my time." Beatrice looked down at the ring. It felt different now, real. "Why did you come back?" He turned to her then, not a flicker of hesitation. "I heard you were getting married. I had to see it with my own eyes, and when I saw him walk out, I could not let you stand there alone." She swallowed hard, eyes stinging. "People will talk. They already do," he said with a slight smile. "Let them." She stared at him for a long moment before her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you really mean to stand by me?" "I do," he said, and something in the way he said it made her believe he always had. That night, she did not go back to her parents' ranch. She rode behind Jeremiah on his horse, her arms around his waist, cheek pressed to his back. He took her to a small homestead on the edge of town, a half-finished cabin, a corral, and a lean-to for his horse. "It is not much," he said, helping her down. "It is more than what I had this morning," she said softly. Inside, he lit a lantern and handed her a folded blanket. "You can take the bed, I will take the floor." "Jeremiah," she said, voice catching. "You do not have to, I know," he said. "But I will." She stood a moment, watching him lay out his bedroll. Her gown rustled as she moved. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked up at her, and his voice was quiet. "You are worth it." That night, Beatrice lay awake in a stranger's bed that already felt safer than her own house. The ring was still on her hand. She turned it slowly in the dim light, remembering the way he had looked at her, like she was not broken, like she was not left behind. She smiled, just a little. And in the darkness across the room, Jeremiah watched her silhouette and smiled too, his heart steady for the first time in years. The morning came slow, pale light leaking through the chinks between the rough-hewn planks of the cabin walls. Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap, the folds of her crumpled dress brushing the floorboards. She hadn't slept. The silence inside the room had been deep, broken only by the soft stirrings of Jeremiah shifting in his bedroll across the room. Now he was gone, though his coat still hung on the peg by the door. She rose, moving stiffly, and found a basin and pitcher near the hearth. The water was cold, but she splashed it on her face with steady hands, rinsed the salt from her skin. She braided her hair back tight and neat, then folded the blanket from the bed and set it by the wall. A low clatter outside caught her attention. She stepped to the doorway and leaned against the frame. Jeremiah was in the yard, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, stacking short-cut logs beside the woodpile. A shallow line of sweat traced his neck, and his movements were quiet, deliberate, like he'd been at it since before dawn. She cleared her throat. "You always take to chores before breakfast." He looked up, squinting in the light. "Cabin doesn't keep itself standing." She stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning chill. "I should head to the mercantile. I've nothing but this dress and what's in my hair." "I figured you might need supplies," he said, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I left $2 on the table inside. It's not much, but it'll get you clothes and thread, maybe a pair of boots." She blinked. "Why would you do that? I didn't put that ring on your finger to leave you wanting." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes dropped to the ground, voice low. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity," he said, stepping closer. "It's what a man does when he means to build something with someone." The wind caught her braid and tugged it over her shoulder. She met his eyes, quiet for a long moment. "You really mean to keep me here, if you'll stay?" She nodded once. Later, she walked the half-mile into town, the hem of her dress brushing dust and burrs. She kept her chin high as she passed the same storefronts that had watched her humiliation the day before. She didn't stop when the grocer's wife narrowed her eyes, or when the tailor's apprentice whispered behind her hand. Inside the mercantile, she moved quickly, choosing calico in soft blue and ochre, a spool of coarse thread, a bundle of cotton for undergarments, and a pair of worn leather boots from the discount shelf. She paid with the exact coins he'd left, then stepped out into the morning glare. She was halfway back to the cabin when she saw the wagon coming down the trail from the west. A broad-chested man drove it, reins in one hand, a heavy satchel beside him on the bench. His face was hard-edged, sun-creased like dried leather. When he spotted her, he pulled the team to a slow halt. "You're the Stenner girl." Her hand tightened around the parcel of cloth. "I am," he nodded toward the trees behind her. "Your brother owes me $45. I've been patient." She took a step back. "I've no dealings with him. He's family. Blood don't quit when the debts come due." The man climbed down, boots thudding against the dry earth. "I've got nothing to give you," she said, voice sharp. He reached into his coat. "Then maybe I take something worth the debt." A shadow moved behind her. Jeremiah stepped from the trees without a word, rifle low at his side, jaw rigid. "You're going to get back in your wagon and ride out." The man turned slowly. "She's got her brother's name. That ties her to what he owes." "She's got my name now." Jeremiah said, stepping between them. And you don't collect debts from women who never signed for them. The man's hand hovered near his coat again, but he paused when he saw how steady Jeremiah's grip was on the rifle. Finally, with a sneer, he turned and climbed back into the wagon. You're making friends with the wrong kind of people, Cade. Jeremiah didn't speak until the wagon had disappeared down the trail. Then he turned to her. You all right? She nodded slowly. That was meant for my brother, not me. I know. But men like that don't care about the difference. She looked down at the threadbare boots in her parcel. Her voice came quiet. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You didn't, he said, brushing dust from her skirt. Trouble was already in the wind. You just gave me a reason to stand against it. She stared at him, the sound of the breeze rustling the leaves above them. You really mean to keep standing? I do. She didn't answer, but something broke open in her chest, something slow and warm and unfamiliar. That evening she cooked with what little they had: cornmeal, a strip of salt pork, and dried beans. As dusk settled, they sat on the porch, bowls in hand, watching the sky burn to copper and ash. He didn't speak much. She didn't need him to. When the first stars appeared, she leaned her shoulder just slightly against his. He didn't move away. The third morning broke with a hush over the land, mist rising off the low grass like breath, the air still and damp. Beatrice stood barefoot on the cabin's back stoop, apron tied over a muslin shift, a tin pail in one hand. She watched the roan mare in the paddock move slow and calm through the fog, the sunrise catching the curve of its flank. Jeremiah was still asleep inside. The night before, he'd come in late from fencing the north line, shoulders drawn tight from work he wouldn't speak of. She hadn't pressed. Instead, she'd ladled stew into a bowl and slid it across the table, and he'd eaten without a word. It was the kind of silence she'd come to understand, one that meant he was carrying something, but not ready to set it down. She crossed the yard to the lean-to, lifted the edge of the feed sack, and scattered a handful for the chickens. They clucked low in the morning stillness, and one of the hens brushed her ankle as it pecked at the earth. She smiled faintly, then turned toward the well, drawing the rope hand over hand until the bucket creaked against the stone. The pail filled quick, and she carried it back toward the porch, her steps steady. When she opened the door, Jeremiah was sitting at the table, shirt on but unbuttoned, rubbing the heel of his palm against the back of his neck. His hair was damp from a basin rinse, and his eyes met hers with a worn kind of gratitude. I was going to fetch water myself, he said. I was already out, she answered, setting the pail beside the hearth. He leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees. I need to ride out to the Miller place. There's a fence down along their north border, and they're losing stock. Offered me $2 and a sack of grain to help mend it. She nodded once, folding the dish towel over the drying rail. How long will you be gone? Back by nightfall if the posts hold. He hesitated, then added, that man from the trail, the debt collector, he's been asking after your brother in the saloon. I don't trust he'll ride far. She straightened slowly, the towel in her hands forgotten. You think he'll come here? I think he wants to scare you, and I think if he thought you were alone, he might try. Her voice came quiet. Then I won't be alone. He stood and came to her, hand brushing her upper arm with a soft touch. There's a rifle behind the door. Only load it if you have to. I know how to shoot, she said, lifting her chin. That's not what worries me, he said. It's what it takes out of a person. She didn't answer, and he didn't push her to. Instead, he pulled on his coat, took his hat from the peg, and paused at the door. I'll be home before the light dies, he said. She watched him ride out, the shape of him growing smaller with every hoofbeat. The day stretched slow. She stitched in the chair by the window, patched the lining of his spare coat, then took to kneading dough for supper bread. The silence was different than before, heavier now, edged with something unsaid. She found herself listening for hoofbeats, glancing toward the road with every shift of wind. By late afternoon, the clouds had thickened low and gray over the hills. A crow called once from the edge of the woods, then fell silent. Someone knocked. She stepped to the door without hesitation, lifting the rifle from behind the frame. The knock came again, louder this time. Beatrice. The voice was low, roughened by tobacco and dust. "You've got no cause to be here," she said through the wood. "I came for a word, not a fight." She didn't open the door. "Then say your word from there." "I don't blame you for siding with Cade. He talks plain, walks like he's carved out of stone. But your brother's in worse trouble than you know. If you don't help settle his debts, he won't be the only one bleeding." She gripped the stock of the rifle tighter. "My brother made his own choices. Folks like him don't get to walk away clean, neither do their kin." Footsteps backed away. She waited a full minute, heart thudding in her throat, before she opened the door just enough to see the trail. Empty. She locked it after that. Jeremiah returned just after sundown, his coat streaked with dirt and a bloodied scrape along his knuckles. She said nothing, only brought the basin and a clean cloth and let him sit while she cleaned the wound. "Fence went up fine," he said, not looking at her. "What happened to your hand?" He watched her wring the cloth. "Ran into a man on the way back. Said you'd had a visitor." She nodded once, eyes still on his hand. "He's trying to scare me. He won't come back." She looked up. "Did you hurt him?" I told him plain. Then I showed him I meant it. She dipped the cloth again, then pressed it gentle to the scrape. "That's twice you've stood between me and danger." "You don't keep count," he said. "Not when someone matters." She set the cloth aside, her hand resting lightly on the table beside his. "I never asked you why you left Red Elk Ridge the first time." He leaned back slightly, gaze slipping to the window. "My father died. Left me a patch of land near Fort Shaw. I tried to make it work, but the water dried up and the soil turned to dust. I came back because I was tired of chasing something that wouldn't root." She studied him, the raw edge in his voice. "And now," he looked at her then, full and without hesitation, "now I want something that holds." Her hand found his, fingers curling slow and sure. Outside, the wind rose, but inside the cabin the air stayed warm. The bread cooled on the table and the lantern cast a gentle glow across the floor. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. Her hand in his said enough. 3 weeks passed before the wind shifted. Summer deepened over the valley, and the cottonwoods along the creek threw long shadows that stretched into the wheat-colored grass. The cabin held the scent of wood smoke and sage now, and each day brought a little more order to the place. Firewood stacked even, the porch swept clean, the tools hung proper on their pegs. The rhythm between them settled without needing to be spoken. Meals passed in quiet understanding. The work flowed shoulder to shoulder, and in the evenings they sat close while the dusk settled soft around them. Beatrice had cut a new dress from the blue calico, and with Jeremiah's help, they'd built a rail for drying laundry beneath the eaves. Her hands no longer shook when she stitched, and the way she moved through the cabin had changed, sure-footed now, no longer walking like she expected to be sent away. Late one afternoon, she stood knee-deep in the stream behind the cabin, skirts hitched up and pinned at the waist, her bare feet sunk into the cool sand. She was rinsing linens, the current tugging gently against the fabric when she heard hoofbeats from the ridge. She looked up, water dripping from her fingers. Jeremiah was riding back with a second horse in tow, a smaller mare with a copper coat and a white blaze, saddleless and wary-eyed. He dismounted near the water's edge and led the mare toward the fence line without saying anything, just a nod in her direction as he passed. She wrung out the sheet and followed him up the bank, brushing her hair out of her eyes. "Whose horse?" He tied the reins over the fence post and gave the mare a pat along her neck. "Ours now." She stepped closer, watching the animal's ears twitch. "You traded for her, found her loose near the old rail line. No brand, no shoes, no sign of a rider. Tracked around half a mile to be sure no prints but hers. Someone left her out there or she ran from something worse." The mare shifted, then leaned her weight toward Jeremiah's hand. "She's half broke," he added. "Won't take much to gentle her." Beatrice reached forward, slow and careful, and let her palm rest against the mare's shoulder. "She's thin. She'll fatten up. Just needs time." They stood in silence a while, the mare breathing steady between them. Then Beatrice said, "I know what it's like. Being left behind, I mean." Jeremiah didn't answer right away. He turned toward her, son catching the edge of his jaw. "That's not where you are now." She looked down at her wet hem, then back to the cabin. "I never asked you what your mother was like." His brow lifted slightly. "Why? You don't speak of her. I figured that meant something." He leaned against the fence post, arms crossed. "She was born in Dakota Territory. Sioux by her mother, German by her father. Learned to ride before she learned to read. After Pa died, she took work cleaning at the fort, washed soldiers' sheets, and never once let them speak down to her. She had hands like leather and a voice like a storm when she was mad. She loved my father, even when he drank too much. Buried him herself and never remarried." Beatrice watched his face as he spoke, the shift in his voice lower, steadier. "She sounds like someone who knew how to hold her ground." "She did." He looked toward the hills. "She died 3 winters past. Fever came on fast. I was too far north to get back in time." Beatrice placed her hand gently over his forearm, her grip firm. "I'm sorry." He didn't pull away. "She'd have liked you. You've got the same kind of spine." She smiled, faint and dry. "I'd have liked her too." That night, a storm rolled in from the west, thunder low and distant like wagon wheels over stone. Beatrice lit the lantern and checked the chinking along the window seams while Jeremiah secured the shutters. The wind pressed hard against the roof, but the walls held. As they sat near the hearth, he turned to her. "I've been thinking." She glanced up from her mending. "That's so. There's a parcel of land east of the creek. Belongs to no one. I could build a second shelter there, barn, maybe a smokehouse if we had the means. If we're to last here, we'll need more than 4 walls and a fire." She set the needle down. "You mean to stay through winter?" "I mean to stay as long as you'll have me." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the rain struck the roof in steady rhythm. Beatrice rose, crossed the room, and knelt beside him. "You gave me a ring when I had nothing. No name, no place. You didn't ask for anything in return." He lifted her hand, slow like always, and held it between his. "I didn't need to. I'm not afraid anymore." He brushed his thumb across the back of her hand, rough skin against hers. "Then we're both where we should be." She leaned into him, her cheek against his shoulder, and for the first time no ghost of her wedding day followed her. Only the warmth of his arm around her and the scent of rain in the air. The storm passed by morning, but the bond between them held stronger than any timber. A life was beginning quiet, rooted and wholly theirs. The August sun leaned low, casting a bronze hush over the grasslands. Beatrice wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, the flour dusting her apron catching the light. She cut the last round from the dough and set it on the baking stone near the hearth. The cabin smelled of yeast and wood smoke, and outside the chickens scratched lazily in the dirt beneath the cottonwood. Jeremiah was out past the ridge, helping the millers butcher a steer. He'd left before dawn with a sack of salt and his whetstone, promising to return by supper. She'd packed him bread wrapped in muslin, and he'd kissed her hand before stepping into the morning light. She moved to the window. lifting the glass pane just enough to let the breeze through. Her eyes drifted to the second shelter they'd begun raising 2 weeks earlier, frame half done, the door lintel set solid. They worked slow but steady, cutting timber from the creek's edge, hauling it by mule cart, not minding the blisters because they were building something that would last. She'd started keeping a ledger, 2 inked pages of seed costs, flour rations, and trade credits. The numbers steadied her. Every entry was a measure of how far they'd come, how much they now had to hold on to. A knock at the door pulled her from thought. She tensed. Jeremiah wouldn't knock. She reached for the walking stick near the doorframe, more solid than the rifle, and closer, and opened the door just enough to see. A man stood there, hat in hand. His hair was longer than she remembered, and his eyes were sunk deep in his face. The resemblance to her father was sharper now under the wear. Her breath caught. "Ezra, B." She stepped outside, boots crunching on the packed dirt. "You shouldn't be here, I know. You brought trouble last time. I didn't come for more of it." "I came to say goodbye." She crossed her arms. "Why now?" He looked past her toward the half-built shelter. "I heard you were still here, that you'd made something of it. I just wanted to see it for myself." "You've seen it," he nodded. "I'm headed north, maybe Idaho." "There's work." She didn't speak. He shifted his weight. "I was never good at keeping things, not money, not promises, but I wanted to tell you I'm sorry for the debt, for leaving you to answer for it." She looked at him then, really looked. The boy she'd grown up protecting was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned too late how little his name meant when he'd passed the weight of it on to her. "I don't need an apology," she said. "I needed a brother. Years ago." His jaw worked, but no words came. She stepped back toward the cabin. "Take care of yourself, Ezra. I'll try." She closed the door behind her, heart calm, not relieved, not angry, just still. That evening Jeremiah returned with a shoulder wrapped in brown paper and a new cut on his arm already stitched. "What happened?" she asked, taking the parcel from him. "Bull caught me with the edge of his horn. Nothing deep." She unwrapped the sling and cleaned the wound with hot water and a cloth from the basin. He didn't flinch, just watched her hands move. "Ezra came by," she said after a moment. His brow lifted, but he didn't speak. "Said goodbye." "He's leaving Montana." Jeremiah nodded once. "You all right?" "I am." She pressed a fresh strip of cotton to his arm. "He's not part of this life, not anymore." He looked at her then, and something softened in his eyes. "This life," he repeated. "Ours." She smiled quietly. "Yes." They ate together on the porch, the sky streaked with violet and rose. She leaned her shoulder against his, and he rested his hand on her knee, warm and solid. The next morning they rode into Red Elk Ridge together. Jeremiah wore his cleanest shirt, and she'd sewn a fresh collar onto her dress. They stopped at the courthouse, where the clerk folded his spectacles and asked them to sign the ledger. There was no ceremony, no ring exchanged this time, just their names written side by side in ink, and the quiet understanding that came with it. Afterward, they walked hand in hand down the boardwalk. A few heads turned, but no one spoke. The whispers had long since faded. They bought seed potatoes and a pair of lambs from the back of a wagon. On the ride home, she laughed when one of the lambs tried to chew the hem of her skirt. Jeremiah only shook his head and said, "We'll need a better fence." That night, she lit the lantern while he latched the door. The cabin was warm, the walls dry, and the fire steady. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "You still sure?" She pressed her lips to his jaw. "I've never been more." They lay down together, her head on his chest, his hand in her hair. The wind outside moved gently through the grass, and nothing felt half-finished anymore. 2 years later, the cabin had doubled in size. The second shelter stood solid, holding barrels of smoked meat and sacks of grain. The mare they'd gentled was now a brood mare, and her foal chestnut with a black mane followed Beatrice everywhere like a shadow. The ledger was full now, the last page marked with harvest tallies and a note in Jeremiah's hand. First year debt-free. She kept that page pressed between the pages of her Bible. They had a boy the following spring, named Elias after Jeremiah's grandfather. He had Beatrice's eyes and Jeremiah's quiet way of watching the world before acting. He took his first steps in the yard behind the cabin, arms outstretched toward his father, who caught him without a word and carried him to the porch as if he'd always known how. Beatrice taught Elias his letters by firelight, her voice low and steady while Jeremiah carved toy animals from spare wood. They filled their days with the kind of living that left no time for regret, only fences to mend, bread to bake, and a love that had grown unshaken from the ruin of what had come before. They never spoke of the church again. They didn't need to. Their vows had been written into the earth, weathered, rooted, and wholly theirs.